All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Brock Johnston. I am the Public Relations Manager here at the Iowa Soybean Association. So thank you all for joining us today. We appreciate your membership with ISA and for taking the time out of your day to sit and listen to the first of our Innovation to Go webinar series here. The Iowa Soybean Association, of course, is driven to deliver those insights, tools, activities, and information that is needed to improve that competitiveness and profitability of Iowa's 40,000 soybean farmers. Today's webinar on planting population, spacing, and timing is an example of this commitment and serves as the first in an ongoing series of Innovation to Go webinars that will be led by ISA's Research Center for Farming Innovation, also known as RCFI. You'll hear that term referenced here throughout the webinar. So to register for any of our upcoming webinars in the series, you can do so by visiting iasoybeans.com. You can also access the registration by following those links that we're going to be sharing in the chat feature of this webinar. You can access that there at the bottom of your screen to view any of those upcoming opportunities in addition to today. So for this unique webinar, you'll be hearing from Anthony Martin. He's a Senior Field Services Program Manager with our CFI team, as well as Josh McDaniel, who's a Spatial Data Analyst. Both of these individuals here work as ISA researchers and analysts in the RCFI, and they are here today to talk to you about breaking down the historic planting and maturity data relative to planting date, as well as general planting recommendations. So with spring just around the corner, we're confident that you will benefit from this timely discussion here today. So just a few housekeeping notes here before we get started. Our time today will be divided into two parts. So first we'll hear from Anthony and Josh and have a discussion, and then we will move right into an interactive Q&A portion. So we'll be taking your questions, you as the audience, and we'll be handing those off to Anthony and Josh to answer here today on our webinar. So if you have any questions during their presentation, please feel free to share those using that Q&A feature that you can find at the bottom of your screen. We'll be kind of rounding those up throughout their presentation today, and we will share them with them there when we move on to our Q&A portion later in the webinar. So with that, I will go ahead and pass it over to Anthony and Josh to get started with today's webinar.
And we are going to be going through some planning recommendations here today. So I guess to start out, some disclaimers, initial thoughts as we move into spring here. So disclaimers, what I'm going to be presenting, the data was collected from on-farm testing, unless I state otherwise. But the majority of this is going to be coming from our own trials that we've conducted over the last 12, 13 years. And these are data-driven recommendations. I say that I know just from going through this that not everyone is going to agree with what I say or what our results are showing, and that's okay. But this is what we have found in our trials. And then just some initial thoughts, I guess, as we move into all of this. What works for one, it may not work for all. Some of these things are going to be very field specific on what works. Once we get into planting, plan, give yourself time. Some of these things, it's really just having that initial plan, and then be willing to adapt as planning comes and we get in. I would be curious to know, the guys on this call, the farmers who have had 30, 40 seasons under their belt, how many of those springs have gone perfectly. I'd be curious to know that. And then the other kind of first thought is trial and error to discover what works on your farm. We're going to be going through a lot of trials that we've done, and it comes down to trial and error. Farmers have worked with us to see what works in these projects, and we would encourage you to potentially take some of these ideas and test them out on your own. So to start out, Just wanted to give Iowa State planting recommendations. I'm not really going to buck these too much. Soil temperatures 50 degrees and rising. Ideal soil moisture levels not within 36 hours of a cold spell. And then our critical planting dates on soybean is going to be May 20th, corn May 18th. We just recently had a publication come out, Advances in Cover Crop Management. I would encourage you, if you are interested, to get a hold of that and read through it. I know there's a PDF version, should be available online. But within this, one of the sections is establishing the cash crop. This is going to be, I guess, the only slide where I really focus on establishing your crop into cover crop. But frequently check depth and spacing. Move myself out of the way here. Residue management is going to be important. There's some disagreement on how to kind of address that. Sharp coulters, residue managers, row cleaners. We have done some work with those in the past. The locations, very few, and the data is available if you would like it. I can get it to you, but it really didn't show us much of a result on kind of what you should be using. Benefits to active downforce. So really to get into the soil, get the seed down. We did work with HTS Ag a few years ago, looking at active downforce versus springs, corn following soybean. The active downforce did achieve 15 bushel response. That is not to say that that's what everyone's going to see. Really, the benefits are going to be shown on those fields that aren't necessarily uniform, where you're going over different terrains, different soil types. And then especially when you are coming out of a cover crop with corn, need to have some of that nitrogen down early. 50 pounds, I would argue maybe even more than that, but 50 pounds seems to be a good starting point, just to have that little bit of nitrogen down for the crop as it begins to grow. Planting date and relative maturity. For those of you who may have been at conference, this is going to be a rehashing of one of the topics that we talked about, but it'll be a lot shorter. So credit where credit is due. This is a multi-state project. NCSRP was the sponsor, North Central Soybean Research Program. But we did work very closely with Iowa State, who conducted the majority of these trials at their research locations across the state over the last 3 years. So a lot of the data I'm going to show comes from Iowa State and those farms. So overview of what was done in these planting date studies. Again, this is a multi-state project. If you want some background on it, I'd be happy to share that with you. But here in Iowa, what we wanted to look at were essentially 4 treatments. So an early maturing bean, early planted and then late planted, and then a later maturity bean, early planted and late planted. The way we determine those for the early maturity beans, we asked the station managers at the Iowa State locations determine what would be an average bean for their area, and then take that and add 0.5. So if they were shooting for a 2.0 bean, have that compared to a 2.5, a 2.5 versus a 3. Our planting dates, we wanted a minimum of a 2-week difference between the early and the late planting date. Some of those were right on 2 weeks. Some we did get a little later into about a month in between planting timings just because of weather. But those were the 4 overall treatments we were looking at. And when we really boiled down, the early RM, late planted, versus the late RM early planted were the two treatments that the project really wanted to focus on. So as I get deeper into the data here, those will be the two that we really look at. We had 20 locations in 2019 and 2020, and then 14 locations here this past summer. Overall response, late RM, late planting date, 66.8 bushel. Late RM, early planting date, 69.8. Early RM, late planting date, 63.1. And then the early RM, early planting date, 65.5. So again, if we look at just that comparison that we wanted, 69.8 versus 63. So just shy of a 7 bushel swing for that comparison. If we look at all of those late RM early planting date versus the early RM late planting date, red bar there is going to be our zero. X-axis is yield difference. So anything on the right-hand side is going to be a net positive for that late RM early planting date. Overall, 71% of our locations showed positive response. 12% were negative, and the rest of those, so 6 out of 34, were neutral or unresponsive. If we want to put some dollars to that, this is based on $15 beans, so $140 loss all the way up to $350 gain per acre. Our average there, our mean, would be the red diamond there in the center. $90 is what our late RM early planting date brought. If we break this down then, just wanted to look at maturity comparisons. So each of these, the red or blue dots, are going to be late planting date, orange or early planting dates. So at each of those planting dates, doing the comparison of the late RM versus the early RM. As you can see, about 60% are going to be in that positive range for that late RM. Very few fell into our negative. And some of this, we do know, some of these higher responsive areas. So, for example, the one at 20 and 25, we do know that some of that came from some discrepancies in what maybe should have been planted for that area, which we'll get into here in just a minute. To look at it, some numbers here: 68.4 bushel versus 64.3. So our 4 bushel response to the late RM equates to just over $61 at that $15 bean price. Planting date, if we do the same thing, but focus on planting date. So blue dots are going to be our late RM, orange dots early RM. We see about 53%. Those are going to be positive for the later or early planting date. Again, about a 3 bushel advantage for the early planting date. Again, $45 based on the $15 soybean price. I mentioned that we did have some locations where we did see some really high responses, and what we were able to determine based on our data and then some conversations with those folks is that we may have been planting some maturities that were a little too early for the area, and that's why we really did see a huge response with the later maturing bean. This is just a subset of 6 of these. You can see where at each planting date that maturity made a difference. So moving forward, we are wanting to continue this work. We are wanting to shift it a little bit to planting date and seeding rate comparisons. but we are open to working one-on-one with farmers with planting date, relative maturity, or seeding rate, single or combination of those factors. We would love to chat with you and maybe try and set something up on your farm to look at this. So we learned from this project, just some early recommendations here. Potential advantage for the planting later RM, planting that early. Recommend farmers consider planting some soybean in the early window, so that April to first week of May. And I know from discussions during our conference here 2 weeks ago that several guys did come up and say that they were already doing that. So I think maybe a good portion of you all on this call may be doing that already. But then also variety trialing to check RM, determine if you are within that region, see that kind of how your variety choices stack up. Jumping into seeding rate. So seeding rate trials, this is just kind of a real broad view. Comparisons are going to be 2 to 4 rates. There on the right-hand side would be one of our most recent projects that we did, comparing 100,000, 130,000, and 160,000 rate on soybean. These were ISA and farmer-led trials. So obviously the farmers are conducting them, but a lot of these trials were just farmers who came to us saying, hey, I want to look at this on my farm. Help me set it up, which we are more than happy to do. A lot of this data we were wanting to use to check for variable rate seeding potential, maybe look at landscape features, which we did a few years ago. And then here in a little bit, there will be some more discussion over zone management using population data. So overall, 2009 to present, on soybean, 140 trials, population trials. This is work that we're going to continue to do into the future. Reports are all available online in the online strip trial database. If you really want just the, here's the recommendation, 120 to 140,000 is what we would tend to recommend for a seeding rate. And that's a very, just kind of a blanket recommendation. And I know I'm waiting to see if some questions start popping in on this, but I know that guys are dropping down to, to 80,000 or even below. And I know that works for some guys. This is just from our data. We are lacking in data showing those really low populations, which we would like to see more of. So we would love to work with some of you if we could on those. But with that 120 to 140,000 population, really looking for a final stand of 100 to 120,000. Based on this, so the most recent 3 treatment trials that we did, that 100, 130, 160, one thing to note is as our seed price goes up, our low rates are going to be become more profitable. As we can see, our 160 really falls off as we move towards that $70 per 140,000. And kind of evens out with that 130. Again, we would like to see some data come in from maybe that 80,000 that we could compare this with. We'll be looking for those here this coming year. Then again, soybean price. So as our soybean prices go up, so our allowable yield loss is going to drop. I only bring this up just as I don't want to say a warning, but for those wanting to go real low or test those really low populations, as we were around that $15 price, to get to 140 where we would have been recommending, there's about a 1.7 bushel allowable yield loss before anything below that, and just leaving our rate at that blanket 140 would have been the best bet. Soybean variable rate. We have had some of these come through. Here again, these are trials that I would like to see more of the variable rate versus these fixed population. But just wanted to throw one up here to show kind of how it was done, some of the results. So for this particular trial, it was part of that collection from that 100, 130, 160, but the farmer did decide to put a variable rate strip in there as well. As we can see, the variable rate strip ultimately out yielded the rest of those. The 100,000 may have just been just a little too light for that, as we're about 2 bushel below our 130, 160. If we do a partial return though on this, using $58 per bag of seed, which I got off of Iowa State's cost of production for 2022, using that $15 seed price and then the average yields for each of those, we can see our partial return here. And that VRT, that return is based off of an average 150,000, which would have been a little high, but if we drop that more, that number is going to go up. And really, with the VRT, we can actually, I don't have it shown here, but we can actually take that up to about 180,000 average, 170, 180 before we dip below our 130, 130,000 return. So recommendations on seeding rate, I mentioned these before, but that general blanket 120 to 140, 140,000 planted, looking for that final stand of 100 to 120,000. If we are wanting to jump into variable rate seeding, higher seeding rates on less productive zones and then lower seeding rates on the more productive zones. For corn, it's going to be flipped. So higher seeding rates on the high productive zones, lower on lower. Again, consider testing lower populations to see what works, but certainly pencil out the ROI once it's all said and done. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Josh here.
Thanks, Anthony. As Anthony has been talking about the variable rate planning, we actually have a tool through ISA that you can sort of, estimate or really can help make you think about how implementing these variable rates on your field may look. So this is generally, what the landing page will look like, aside from the text on the right, obviously, but the left and then the top is generally what it looks like. And in order to use this tool, you do need 3 years of point shape files exported from SMS and then put into a zip folder. That's so then the tool can create stability zones and aggregate the yield to provide the best recommendations possible. We want to stress that we are not collecting any of your data through this tool. It's only loaded on your own computer and it's processed online. Once again, we don't download it, we don't save it anywhere. It stays on your computer. It doesn't go anywhere else. So we know how important data privacy is to everyone, especially these days. And we do have some example data that you can actually run on the tool. You can see on the left there under data sources as example data. You can just run that right away and see how the tool works and see if you want to use it yourself and give it a try there. And so then into the tool and say you've run that example data, this is generally what it'll look like. You'll have the aggregated yield for each year, and then broken down into different yield categories, and then what the mean of each of those categories is. And so say you want to upload your own data, you'll need to click on the drop down under data source and select upload data. And then that upload will pop up and you'll put in your zip file there. Just browse to it. And then once you have it, and then as you see, you hit that upload button and you'll browse to your folder that you want to upload. And then once you have that folder selected and you have your different years picked out there, you'll hit the aggregate button, and then it might take a little bit depending on field size, because for some of the larger fields it may take a little bit, but be patient with it. And then you'll get these aggregated yields, and I'll show you what else you will get with that. And so then you will come to the, oh shoot, I can't move that. You'll come to the next page here, and you'll be able to select different uniform seeding rates from the different data sources. So we have 3 different sources you can pick. You can pick the ISU data source, the Midwest data source, or your own defined source if you want to play with those different rates and see how they might change things. And as with the ISU data source, you'll pick your cropping district to get the correct recommendation there. With the Midwest, you just specify what your seeding rate was, and same with the manual. And then for each category, they'll give you those different recommendations for seeding rate and then what the yield increase yield increase may be. And then, there we go. And then the next page is your cost and return analysis. And I know this looks like a lot, but it's kind of easier to digest if you're on the tool yourself. So I'll just quickly kind of summarize what each of these are. So the top box is your yield gain and then your total economic gain that is expected for each yield category. And so those numbers in bold, the first one is the number of acres of the field for each zone. Then you have your expected yield increase with the adjusted seeding rate. And then finally, you have your total economic gain for each zone per acre there on the right. Then on the box on the middle to the left, that calculates your additional seed cost based on if you're, have to increase your rate or if you decrease your rate as a whole there. And then on the right in the middle, you have your profit per selected yield category. And that's taking into account both your seed cost there, your extra seed cost, as well as your total economic gain based off of the expected increase in yield. And then finally at the bottom there, you have the profit from the seeding rate change per the entire field. And so, in this example, we're expecting a total profit increase of 380 for the whole field as a whole. And we want to stress too, these are just estimates. They're obviously not set in stone, but it can, help you think about things and maybe where you can adjust and how it may help, how it may help your bottom line on your farm. And so the final page is your break-even analysis. And really what this is looking at is it allows you to add different variable rate costs, for increased equipment costs or, someone helping you, for example. And then you can also change your soybean price there, so if you want to say it's 16, it'll automatically adjust as well. And then finally, you can change your total soybean production cost as well to better suit, your farm. And so what the top box is looking at is what your break-even yield response is for each zone with the extra seed cost. And so, for this example, it's all 3, the break-even yield response of 3 bushels for each zone. And then the bottom box is looking at the break-even soybean price. So what the price of soybeans needs to be to cover the extra the cost of the extra seed and total production. And then there you can see, it just takes into account all those different factors that we have you enter. And so hopefully it can provide a nice, estimation of what you're looking at. And then finally, keeps being weird. We just wanted to show where the Midwest data source, where their equations come from to estimate these variable seeding rates. And so you see they have equations for low, medium, and high yield there that allow you to, or that it allows to give those estimations and recommendations. And same goes for Iowa State. They have lots of studies on those that helps estimate those. And we're going to try to evolve this tool to involve the ISA studies that, Anthony's been talking about to hopefully improve it. And with that, I'll throw it back to Anthony.
Thank you, Josh. So next thing, these last few topics are going to be kind of just high level. First one here, emergence. Now, we do know that obviously emergence, even emergence is critical in corn. Also in soybeans, uneven emergence is going to reduce yield. And we did have a study that was done looking at 3 locations, looking at 20 plants in a row, marking those out from delay and emergence. So obviously day 1 out to day 5 and beyond. And one thing that we're seeing with that is that, I guess let me jump back here. So those were flagged out, followed through, and then at the end of the year, they did go out and hand harvest those plants and did pod counts and then seed counts from within those. But I guess the overarching thing to note here is that those delayed plants, those that were 5 or more days, really kind of equate to nothing more than competition. They are still producing seeds, but not at a level that really we need, and that competition is really just going to be potentially reducing our yield from those plants next to them. So to even help even out that emergence, some recommendations would be to plant soybeans deeper, so you're assured good seed to moisture contact, good seed to soil, but really making sure you get down into moisture. No-till situations, the 1.5 inches. Conventional, really going down to that 1.5 to 2 inches. I'm kind of pushing down in. Again, I mentioned this earlier on in the talk. Frequently get out, check planting depth, make sure everything is set correctly. That what your monitor is saying is what is actually happening out behind the planter. And then again, planter residue managers, making sure that we are able to get that good seed to soil contact. In-furrow biologicals. So Teresa Middleton had presented this at our conference 2 weeks ago, but I wanted to kind of bring it back. I know biologicals are going to be big this year. We're getting a lot of questions about them. We have looked at several in-furrow applied products. Here would be a list: Source, Endoprime, Vertex, NewTek, Vita. And with all of those that we've looked at or had farmers submit data on, here's the overall result. Really, we have not seen any significant response to those products. We've done, about 60 60 trials, and we've had 5 responsive. With that being said, you know, the biological market it's rapidly growing. We are going to see some of these companies come and go, these products come and go, just as we you know, see more testing, see what works. But with the trials that have been submitted to us, we haven't seen a consistent response. One big thing with these is that biological products, they are living, so making sure to follow the instructions for the storage and use that the company provides. Really look at, if you are going to test these, look at the ROI, maybe over yield differences. A lot of these products are going to be so, I guess, inexpensive that it's not going to take much for that yield to cover it. But look at the ROI. And then as far as individual field testing, one big recommendation I would make is dealer, salesman, you know, whoever is coming to you potentially wanting to sell a biological product, and really this goes for any product. Talk to them about testing. See if you can get just a small amount to you know, do a few acres on your farm to see how it performs. And again, only dedicate a few acres to those products. I wouldn't recommend jumping whole hog on you know, 50% of your acres without doing some small acre tests, potentially over 1-2 years. The last kind of topic that I'm really going to hit here is nitrogen on soybean. I guess really overall, we're not seeing huge responses. The 12.1 and 6.6 bushel response that we see on the graph there, those two came from extremely high yielding environments, so 80 bushel plus environments, which is where we would expect to see that applied nitrogen, you know, pay for itself and increase yields. But the 6.6 bushel, that for the majority of these, it was 50 pounds applied to the soybean crop. That 6.6 actually had just over 100 pounds of N, and with fertilizer prices where they are at the moment, you know, that's going to be questionable if that's actually even going to pay for itself, even with a significant response. Side dressing showed no response over this collection of trials. Really, the response that we did get was from pre and starter, but again, not a proven practice. We are still looking at this, but as of right now, it's not something that I would necessarily recommend outside of, like I mentioned, those high yield environments. Jumping into online tools, wanted to just briefly hit on these. Josh went through one of those, but online tools, RST field reports. So all the reports from the trials that I showed here today, and everything that we've done over the last 13 years is available to look at online. If you go to the Iowa Soybeans website, up on the top bar, research, results and tools, and then replicated strip trial individual field reports view database, you can sort through these, really get down. If you have a specific question, see if it's a product that we have used before. Keep in mind that some may just have been farmer submitted, so there may only be 1 or 2. But we wanted to make it available for you to look at. And then especially like on the population, if you scroll all the way to the bottom, if you have a single crop selected, so corn or soybean, you can look at return on investment for that treatment or that product. Another online tool available, get to it the same way as the database, just up a few levels. There's ISOFAST. Here again, this is going to be a little more detailed We're not going to have the individual trial reports. This is going to be looking at the project as a whole. So what was done, the rationale behind the work, trial locations, all the results from those, what, if there were significant yield responses seen, and then some general conclusions that we pulled from those trials. So I would encourage you to go there. Again, if there's specific questions that you would like answered, some of that may be available online through that tool. There also is another tool which I didn't make a slide for. EVOS, it's essentially ISOFAST, slimmed down. So it may not have all of the rationale, the conclusions, but it's going to be a little easier to potentially work with. But that is also available on our website. So final thoughts, just kind of piecing from all of the recommendations that were given throughout the presentation here. Trial and error to discover what works. Mention looking at seeding rate, maturity. If you have your own questions, we would love to work with you to help develop trials to do this work on your farm. But really, even if you're not working with us, our recommendation would be to test, test your ideas, see, again, it's just that trial and error, what works on your farm. Plan, give yourself time. That general soybean seeding rate, 120 to 140,000 planted with final stand of 100 to 120,000. If you are going to be variable rate seeding, potentially using the online tool that Josh showed, but lower seeding rates on productive ground, and then flip that for corn. Frequently check depth and spacing. For biologicals and nitrogen on soybean, we're not seeing any consistency, not something that we're necessarily going to recommend right now. And then, with all the work that you may be doing on your farm, follow up with that ROI at the end of the year. I am going to jump through this fairly quickly because I know Brock and Devin are probably a little irritated I'm taking so long. For 2022, we are actively recruiting trials just based off of what we've talked about today. Planting date, maturity, seeding rate trials, nitrogen management, and then NCSRP project. This is going to be another multi-state project looking at soybean systems, improved soybean yield systems. And really right now in year one, we are looking for farmers to go online. There's a tool going to be available for a survey. It's a little in-depth. We would, like to talk to you maybe before you do that so we can prepare you, have some things ready. But we're looking for a lot of farms to get put into the survey system. And then a subset of those we will be doing scouting here this summer on. So that's the one big push at this point, especially before we get into planning, still have some time inside. So with that, questions or sign up, you have our contacts there. For those of you in Northeast Iowa, myself and Scott Nelson are going to be kind of splitting up the area for the time being until we find a new manager to cover the area.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Anthony and Josh, for sharing your expertise with us today. All great information for farmers out there to take home and implement. So we will be moving into our Q&A portion of our webinar. So just a reminder for everyone listening, if you have any questions for Anthony or Josh, you can go ahead and use those on the Q&A feature located at the bottom of your screen there. So we will go ahead and kick things off here with a few questions that were submitted throughout the webinar today. So the first, it looks like we had a question here for Anthony. This attendee wants to know if you can talk a little bit more about the impacts of row spacing on yields.
Yeah, so and I didn't touch on that because I already knew I was running long on it. There's a lot of information to try and get through. Yeah, so the data that we have gone through, our 15-inch or narrow row spacing on soybean, we do, and we've only had a handful of trials come in on that. That is something that, if guys were willing to look at that, we would love to work with them to set up some narrow row versus 30-inch row spacing. But what we did see was about a 1 bushel advantage for that narrow row spacing. Beyond just that yield, though, with the narrow rows, we're going to have that close that canopy quicker. On the same lines, though, there are some more risks associated SCM white mold, which may be a little more severe within those narrow row operations. So
Awesome. Okay, yeah, we'll move right along here. So we did have a few other submitted questions. So another attendee was wondering, Anthony, for you, have you done any work with seed treatments? So we'll get that question up there.
yep, we have. And I guess this would be one where, again, I guess kind of jumping back, I'd encourage you to go online to ISOFAST or just to the individual field trial reports to look at those. But some of the big ones that we've had some, I guess, fairly intensive projects on, Clariva Complete, Olivo, NEMA Strike would have been a few that we had with Olivo, I guess, hands down compared to the others, showing the biggest advantage. About half of those were significant for a positive yield response. Corn, we also looked at NEMA Strike on corn, but that didn't show any significant sites over about 18 trials. So
Awesome. Okay, let's see here. So we'll move on to some more questions here. So just in that same realm, it looks like, so an attendee had a question about a specific product here that we'll go ahead and put up on the screen. So they're wanting to know, have you tested the Pivot Bio proven product?
I kind of thought this one was going to come up. I know the Pivot Bio proven product is that's been a hot one. We had a lot of questions at conference, hands down the one people wanted to know about during the biological discussion. We have not done a large scale project using that product. We have had some farmers just submit their own data for us to look at. And I guess due to, trying to keep everything anonymous, several of those guys didn't want us sharing their data. But I know in discussions, it seems to be it works for some guys and not for others. It's really going to come down to field conditions. The one thing, and this goes with that proven product along with the other nitrogen fixing biological products, is that the other component to that is your nitrogen management, which I think may get lost sometimes. So if you are going to look at that, there may be that reduction in nitrogen to the field that needs to be factored in to overall ROI.
Awesome. We will put another question here from our audience here up on the screen. So it looks like, Anthony, I've got another one for you, and then I'm probably going to hand it off to Josh here. It looks like he has a couple questions in the queue too, so we'll get those off to him, but we'll get this one for you here first. So this attendee, Curtis, would like to know, have you done any tests regarding importance of singulation on soybeans?
Not any large scale project. Some anecdotal work, but that is something that we would be interested to maybe pursue if we had the right setup and the right cooperator, would be to look at that.
Awesome. And just a reminder for attendees here today as well, we do have Anthony and Josh's info, not only there on the screen, but also in that chat feature box too. So if you have specific questions or anything, we can go ahead and connect you with them via email or phone number on our site as well. So we will go ahead and put up another question here. It looks like this one's going to be for Josh. So we will go ahead and pop this one up on screen. All right, so this attendee wants to know, so can I use less than 3 years of yield files for the population tool that you had mentioned earlier in your presentation?
Yeah, so currently you do need 3 years of yield files for the tool, but we are looking at possibly using 2 years, and that's yeah. They're looking into using possibly 2 years at some point. It's kind of emerging, the study on it. But yeah, long story short, currently it's set up for 3 years. And I forgot to mention earlier, because I was kind of rushing a little bit, the tool also is just set up for soybeans currently as well. It's not set up for corn. So keep that in mind as well for the tool.
Okay. And then it looks like, so I had another question here. Let me put this one up on the screen. Oh, maybe it's not going to work. Okay, I did have another question for you, Josh, here from an attendee. So this person wants to know if they have any trouble uploading any of those files into the tool. Is there specific instructions that they should follow to get help or access with that?
Yeah, so there is a user manual tab, which I forgot to include. But also, you know, if they're having any trouble and that user manual doesn't help them, they can feel free to email me or honestly, like Anthony as well, or someone else at ISA, and they can, you know, put them in contact with someone that can help them out with that, because we do understand these, you know, tools aren't always the easiest to use. So we're more than happy to help, or, you know, get on the phone, get on a Zoom and help them use the tools.
Awesome. Okay, well, we'll go ahead with our last couple minutes here and just cover a few last minute items here. So we've heard some great insights today. I trust that you found this opportunity as beneficial as you continue to make those decisions for your operation here for this year. So a special thanks again to Josh and Anthony, our guest presenters with the RCFI team, for sharing their expertise with us today and just for answering those questions. So, today's discussion, as I mentioned earlier, is only the first in an ongoing series of these webinars that we're doing in this Innovation to Go series. So those will be taking place each month. You can join researchers at ISA's RCFI for other virtual opportunities as they share research updates, insights, ways to engage, as you look to improve that profitability and manage resources on your specific operation. So I just wanted to plug our next webinar in the series will take place on Tuesday, April 5th. That'll be from 12 to 1 p.m., same time as today. So where attendees, you'll learn about the different various biological products that have been tested by our CFI staff and just kind of general recommendations for appropriate use. We touched on that a little bit today, but we'll be able to go into some more detail with that webinar opportunity. So stay engaged with ISA as we continue to announce those new webinar topics and presenters in the coming months. We'll have information on those here out in the next few months for you. So if you're interested in participating in any research trials or projects with the RCFI team, you can complete that trial interest form that's found on our website and linked in our chat feature here on this webinar as well. If you'd like to register for any upcoming webinars or any forums like that, you can visit iasoybeans.com. So on behalf of the Iowa Soybean Association, I'd like to thank you all for your participation in today's webinar. So thank you.